each and every week to have the radio play-by-play voice of both the University of Cincinnati football and basketball Bearcats, Dan Hoard. And, of course, he'll be jumping on, I assume, the charter plane with the Bearcats off tomorrow and can actually sit back, relax, not rush through airports, etc. Dan Hoard, is that accurate? You're on the charter flight with the Bengals tomorrow?
That is accurate. And if there's a city that you want to get to early, the day before a Bengals game, it is the great city of New Orleans. I'm a foodie, Thom, so I'm going to take advantage of arriving there at a reasonable hour and have a great meal.
Okay, well, we were talking yesterday with an anchor down there, young man born and raised in New Orleans, and we capped off our conversation with him, asking him about where to go. And there are, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of choices, especially being a foodie as you are. What would you suggest? Where are you going tomorrow night? Because I know you've already thought of it and got it planned out and a reservation and all that kind of thing, right? Where are you heading?
I don't have a reservation because the place I am going does not take reservations. And this is just an appetizer recommendation. This is not a dinner reservation. A recommendation rather, but my good friend Todd Graffinini, the voice of the NBA's New Orleans Pelicans, was born and raised in New Orleans. So a few years ago, while I was in New Orleans on a family trip, Todd reached out and says, "Whatever you do, you have to go to Drago's and get the char-grilled oysters." And I told Todd, I don't like oysters. It's a textural thing. They taste like phlegm to me. No thanks, I'm not having them. He said, if we are friends and our friendship means anything to you, you will go to Drago's and get the char-grilled oysters. Well, when somebody says that, you got to go, right?
You got to go.
So I went. Tremendous. As he puts it, the single best bite of food you will have in one of the great eating cities of all time. So I will be at Drago's to get my char-grilled oysters. I'm not sure about dinner after that yet. This will not be where I have dinner, but it's going to be where I have an appetizer and a drink or two. And it's not just the char-grilled oysters, but they come with this fresh bread that you use to sop up the sauce. And that might be the best part. I don't even know that I need the oysters, but it's unbelievably good. For anybody making the trip, go to Drago's. It's in the Hilton Riverside on Canal Street, right on the edge of the French Quarter.
Yep.
Unbelievably good.
All right. Well, I'm glad to know that. I haven't been down there in a while. I mentioned yesterday, I ended up down there a lot through the years with both college and professional football, and never tried that. So the next time I'm in, that's what I'll do. And I know a lot of folks are going to make the trip down there to New Orleans for this coming weekend, and why not? When you look at this game, Danny, and we've been sitting here and bantering back and forth with Casey and Paul about the way this season has started, and I've never done a talk show before where you're on every day, and I always used to listen to guys all the time and wonder, man, how do they talk about the same stuff every day? But it feels like this Bengals season has made us almost regurgitate the same kind of thinking over and over about this is a game they got to win. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, 2-4 as opposed to 3-3, and this is a team with all their injuries, especially, that you should be better than.
I agree with that. I heard what you guys were saying before I came on, thinking that 10 wins is probably what it's going to take to win the AFC North, and I would agree with that. I don't think fewer than 10 would have a chance. I think it's got to be 10 or 11. So when you look at the rest of the schedule, they need 8 more wins to get to 10. Where are those 8 wins? I think if you go 5-1 at home, there are 4 games that I think are very winnable at home where they probably should win. And then 2 really tough games at home, Kansas City and Buffalo. If you can win at least 1 out of those 2, then you got 5 victories at home. Then you got to win 3 road games. You look at the road games, I think that New Orleans is one of the more winnable road games. They are a 2-point favorite this week. I think the Saints are decent. I don't think they're great. It looks like Marshawn Lattimore is probably out this week. At least that's the word I got from the voice of the Saints when I talked to him on Wednesday. So, yeah, I think it's become a really important game because the margin of error gets smaller and smaller every time you lose a game early in the season.
This is probably a tough question to answer, Dan, and I asked Paul Doherty the same question a minute ago, but nobody sees the team more frequently practice games, obviously, than you do. If you had to pick one of the two positions to have the player there, and both of them are hurt right now, if you had to have one of the two play, Jonah Williams or T. Higgins?
I would say Jonah Williams, just because the drop-off from Jonah to the next guy at left tackle is probably more significant than the drop-off from T to the other wide receivers. Don't get me wrong, T is awesome. He's a lot better than Mike Thomas or Trent Taylor or whoever you put in there in his place. But if Jonah's out, I'm not even positive who that guy is. They put in Hakeem Adeniji for the few plays that Jonah missed in the second quarter against the Ravens. I assume it would be Adeniji starting at left tackle, but I hope that's not the case. Based on what I've seen from Jonah, not on the practice field, but just in the locker room, talking to him, his body language, the way he's treating this, I think he's probably going to play, but we might not know until the pregame warmups on Sunday.
What about Higgins?
Same thing. T seems like he's in great spirits. I think they're being very cautious for obvious reasons. He tried to play at the beginning of the game last Sunday night. So if I had to make a bet, my bet would be that he will go. Zach Taylor will be talking to reporters shortly. We may know more then. But again, with T, it might once again come down to the pregame warmups.
Curious as to your thoughts about the comments made by Joe Burrow last week about the problems the Bengals, the challenges the Bengals have been facing in regard to this Tampa 2 cover 2 defense, which we've talked about ad nauseum around here, but it's been around forever, going back to the days of Tony Dungy and Monty Kiffin and that whole crew down in Tampa when they won a Super Bowl. John Lynch was the main man in that whole secondary, but how were you struck, if at all, about the comments Burrow made after the game last week, specifically talking about what they've not been able to do and what has been taken away from them in those types of defenses so far this year?
I assume, Tom, you mean specifically when he said something to the effect of, if defenses are going to play us that way, we're not going to be able to throw the deep ball or something like that?
Yeah.
Right. Here's how I take that. We need to get them out of those defenses in order to throw the deep ball. That's the formula. And the key to that is running the ball, which thank heavens they started to do in the second half against Baltimore. And if you go back and look at the second half of that game, the Ravens did start to bring one safety down once Joe Mixon was running for an average of more than 5 yards per carry. So that's the formula. I think that's what Joe meant. And let's see if they can build on it this week. I had the opportunity to visit with TJ Hushmanzada on Wednesday. That interview's on my podcast, the Bengals Booth Podcast. I asked him, because he's one of the smartest guys that ever played for the Bengals. I said, what's the formula? How does an offense beat two deep safeties or two high shells? He said, run the ball. I mean, it's that simple, that definitive. If you say, if you're able to run the ball, a defense is not going to let you kill them by running for 5 to 10 yards, play after play after play. Eventually they react. One safety comes into the box. Now those opportunities return for Jamar and T and even Tyler Boyd. And in the second half last week, there were some chances late in the game. They started going to Jamar further down the field, and he didn't have any deep catches, but he did draw 2 pass interference penalties, which are just as good. So that's the formula. It's no great mystery. Let's see if they can build in what they did in the second half.
I want to get off the Bengals for a minute. We were talking about, at the beginning of this conversation, we're talking about how many wins it takes to perhaps win the division. You're thinking 10, maybe as many as 11. Tiebreakers come into effect. The Bengals are 0-2 so far in their divisional games. When you look at the other two, and I'm going to take Pittsburgh, obviously, out of the mix here. If you had a crystal ball and you look now till the end of the year, the Ravens versus the Browns, Which one of those two teams over the long haul do you think ends up being a better team, knowing that if Deshaun Watson comes back, he comes back and plays for the Brownies?
Ravens, no doubt about it, at least this year. I have no idea how good Deshaun Watson is going to be when he comes back this year. I think eventually he will be one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, but it might not be for those games he plays at the tail end of this season for Cleveland. When he played in the preseason this year, he looked brutal. Didn't take a snap last year. It's going to be roughly 2 full seasons by the time he gets back and plays this year. So long term, I think he's going to be a great quarterback for Cleveland, but I don't think it's going to be this year. Baltimore, on the other hand, I think is one of the best teams in the NFL. They've had a double-digit lead in every game they played. They had a 21-point lead over Miami in the fourth quarter and inexplicably blew it. They had a 17-point lead over everybody's Super Bowl pick, the Buffalo Bills, and blew it. I think Baltimore is a great team, and to me, Baltimore versus Cleveland this year is not even close.
Okay. All right. So you think it comes down to what everybody thought maybe at the very beginning of the year, Bengals, Ravens, and there you have it. One maybe wins the division. Well, one will win the division, and the other is a wild card. Fair to say?
That's the way I look at it. I think they are clearly the best 2 teams in the division this year.
Okay. All right. Fellas, you have anything you'd like to ask Mr. Hoard before we let him go? He's a busy man. You've got to get to Drago's.
Dan, it sounded like Drago's was a suggestion from our guest down there yesterday. So that's a popular place. Hopefully, if I ever get down there, I'm not an oyster guy either. Can you give me any advice as a non-oyster guy for what you have to know going into it?
No, nothing required. I mean, like you, I had no desire to try char-grilled oysters. None. It was strictly out of respect for my friend who was born and raised there. And when he said, our friendship is on the line, if you don't take my advice and get these char-grilled oysters. And I will say this, if you go to Drago's and try the char-grilled oysters and you slurp that first one and you think this is disgusting, I never want to try this again, you will be happy just taking the fresh bread. It is that good.
All right. You've convinced me, Dan.
Casey?
There you go.
Yeah, I think my only question is, are you enjoying the break from doing the UC games? Are you enjoying that time? Because you're going down to New Orleans, are you going to do more than just eat? Is there any other plan than scheduling for dinner? Any family time, anything like that?
Well, it's been a much easier week because I've only had to prepare for one game. You know, homework's a major part of the job during the course of the week. So I like to joke that I study for 2 final exams every week with a college game on Saturday and a Bengals game on Sunday. So it's just one exam this week, which is much, much easier. I'm looking forward to getting down there at a normal time. I won't have to travel at the crack of dawn on Sunday morning. I won't have to hope I can make a connection on Saturday night. I know I'm going to get there with the team on Saturday. That means a great dinner. And I like to run when I can, first thing in the morning on Sunday, if I'm able to, on the road. And New Orleans is a great running city. So I will work off the char-grilled oysters and the fresh bread with a nice morning run on Sunday, and I'll be ready to go for a noontime kick, New Orleans time on Sunday.
That's right. That's the problem with New Orleans when you go down there, is if you're going to play down there and work down there, you like the 3:30 kick. Because in that way, you know, your night's going to go a little longer. If you got some cobwebs the next day, you got plenty of time to get rid of them, you know, shake your head a little bit and get going. But you don't have that option.
Share one more? Yeah, can I share one more bit of wisdom about New
Orleans,
Tom? All right. So people are probably familiar with the Hurricane, the official drink of New Orleans.
Yes.
Most famously served at Pat O'Brien's.
Yes.
So it's this really tall glass, and it tastes like fruit punch, but it's got a bunch of shots of alcohol in there.
Yeah.
So you don't know how it's going to hit you, and then the next thing you know, you're not in good shape. I will be very careful with the alcohol consumption. But I was in a taxi once in New Orleans, and the taxi driver gave me very sage advice about the Hurricane. He said, "Sir, the Hurricane is like a woman's bosom. One is too few, 3 is too many. So that was the wisdom of a New Orleans taxi driver, and I've remembered it ever since.
That is great advice. Perfect way to tie a ribbon around our visit with Dan Hoard. There you have it. Danny, have a great weekend. Have fun in New Orleans. Enjoy yourself. Be careful. You know, I mean, that's the thing now about New Orleans. It's changed a lot. But be careful and have fun.
I will. I love this city. It's one of my favorite places, so I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Great to have Dan Hoard with us and him taking the time to join us each and every week. And we were really, really grateful for him and his time and his insight. And he's fired up. Drago's it is.